In the fall of 2023, a long-lived conflict in the Middle East came to a head in the most horrific way. Israelis and Palestinians and people around the world woke up to a new, if not unfamiliar, reality. Mya was one of them.
When October 7th happened, I have a lot of friends still in Israel. I spent my formative adult years in Israel. I would say that my closest friends remain there. And so I woke up in the middle of the night to my phone exploding with text messages.
The first message she saw was from a close friend.
And it said, "In case you wondered, I'm okay." And this guy is a very mellow, calm. This is not a message I would get from him normally. So I was like, oh my God, what's going on? And I checked the news and I was just shocked. I couldn't believe it.
That day, journalist Mya Guarnieri knew the lives of her people and her Palestinian ex-husband's people would not be the same again. And neither would their relationship. From the Boston Globe, this is Love Letters. I'm Meredith Goldstein. This season, we've talked a lot about whether people can change. But what about the world? Or history? How does what's happening in the world change us and our relationships? Today's story is about that. I want to hop right in. Meet Mya. She's a journalist whose family straddles the lines of conflict in the Middle East. She married a Palestinian man, and she's American-Israeli.
So currently, I'm working on my second book, which is a memoir about my love story.
I interviewed Mya as she was finishing this book, so she had a lot on her mind about her marriage and her family. Mya was born in the U.S. She was an only child and grew up with her mother and stepfather. Her mom was Jewish, which was not the most common thing to be in Gainesville, Florida, where Mya grew up.
When I tell people I grew up in Gainesville, Florida, people are like, oh, University of Florida, Gators, it's so liberal there. And I'm like, maybe the campus is an oasis of liberalism. But Alachua County, make no mistake, is the deep South, okay?
Mya says she encountered what she calls casual anti-Semitism regularly as a child.
I grew up with people, telling me that I should convert or I'd go to hell. I wore a chai necklace when I was a little girl. And people would look at the symbol, the chai. They had no idea what it was. They'd be like, why are you wearing a dog around your neck?
For those who don't know, the chai is a Hebrew symbol. It means life. Mya was actively aware of the presence of historic hate groups around town, even in the families of her peers.
And I had a friend in high school whose father actually was in the KKK. My friend himself was a lovely, very non-racist, non-anti-Semitic person. But when I visited that house, when I entered that house, I had to make sure that my chai was tucked in my shirt. But the father was not going to attack me physically. But, there were no Jews allowed in his house.
Maybe this is why, in her late 20s, after getting degrees and having a short marriage, Mya has this idea that she'll go somewhere where she won't be the only Jewish person around. And that place is Israel. And pretty quickly, she's enjoying living in a place where she is surrounded by Jewish people for the first time in her life. It's incredibly meaningful after her Florida experience.
From the moment I arrived, even before I arrived, there was a relief. And I want to own it and say that I was conflicted about, everything. But there was this deep sense of relief I felt there. People knew what my holidays were and celebrated them. No one told me I was going to hell for being Jewish. And I was like, oh, this is like what it means to be inside a community that accepts you, that understands you. And that was very powerful for me. As much as my politics run against the grain of the Israeli consensus, that feeling of belonging was very powerful.
Mya knows Israel has a complicated history that she wants to interrogate, but her plan is to do some good.
I went to Israel to volunteer. The idea was that I would stay for 10 months. And the volunteer program was oriented around social justice, around the Hebrew phrase tikkun olam, which means world repair. I had different options when I was signing up for the volunteer program. I had chosen to volunteer in Jaffa, helping Palestinian students actually at a Palestinian school in Jaffa with their English.
This becomes complicated, though. She loves being in Israel. She loves the unique Jewish culture there. She's also watching people who aren't Israeli suffer. Palestinian people and others.
When I arrived to South Tel Aviv, the volunteer program made it mandatory that we visit all the different volunteer sites. And in that process, I saw what was called a black market kindergarten in South Tel Aviv. And it was a, daycare that a woman was running in her home. It was unlicensed. It was horrific. And these daycares were for migrant workers, really, and African asylum seekers. And I was just shocked by what I saw and heartbroken. And it's like I forgot about Jaffa and I forgot about, teaching English to anyone. And I was like, I'm going to volunteer in these daycares.
It's this experience that puts her on a career path.
I ended up making friends with a local woman who was a journalist. And I mentioned to her the daycares. And she said, oh, wow, that's an amazing story. Can you write a pitch about that? And I said, what's a pitch? And she said, oh, it's just a summary of the story. I had no idea what anything was. So she gave me her editor's email address and I sent this pitch. And he wanted me to write a kind of first person about volunteering in the kindergarten. And then it snowballed from there.
Pretty soon, Mya's working all over the region.
I'd been working as a journalist for about 4 years at that time. I'd been freelancing, and I'd been making ends meet quite well as a freelancer for a number of years. But then the Arab Spring had hit in early 2011, and work had dried up.
By 2011, Mya's identity is invested in living and working in Israel as a journalist, and she finds this so meaningful. But at this point, there is not enough work for writers like her. There is no money. But just as she's wondering if she should give everything up, she gets a writing gig, something for the Boston Review. It's a story about the Palestinian bid for an upgrade at the United Nations. The Boston Review isn't going to pay her for this story, but she figures the assignment is at least a way to stay in the game. Just in case it's confusing, the Boston Review has no affiliation with the Boston Globe. It's a quarterly American publication focused on politics and history analysis.
And so I went out to cover the story for the Boston Review, and I went out there, without my Arabic was quite rough to non-existent. I would say that I was fluent in Hebrew at that time, but you can't walk around Ramallah interviewing people in Hebrew.
She crashes in Ramallah at a friend's house for the story. His name is Joseph, and he's this American-Israeli journalist who'd left the States years prior. They go out for drinks with friends at a local bar the night before her assignment.
It was around midnight, and I'm standing there, and it hit me. I said, I need a translator. Because plenty of people in Ramallah speak English, right? But for the sort of reporting I wanted to do, I wanted to go deeper. I wanted to hear what, people on the street thought about the bid for an upgrade at the UN, and not just the English speakers.
Joseph points to one of his friends, who's in an outdoor garden space at this bar. Magical twinkling lights outside. It's a group of activists, expats, journalists. The whole thing is quite a scene.
And he looked around and he said, oh, that guy over there, Muhammad, he's a fixer. And I said, oh, okay, and he led me around the circle and introduced us.
A fixer, basically an interpreter, and a person who can help navigate the logistics of a story. Mya's first impression of Muhammad is that he's calm and quiet, the foil to her outspoken and fiery personality. She's instantly attracted to him. But they immediately test each other's patience.
Muhammad and I pretty much had our first argument in that moment. I told Muhammad, well, I'm out here doing this story and I need someone to help me translate. And I was quite professional about it all. I wasn't, hello, how are you? I think I was just straight into the business. And I said, how much do you charge? And he said, well, how much are they paying you? And I was like, well, that's neither here nor there, unwilling to admit that they were paying me nothing. I'll pay your price, regardless. And he's like, are they paying you at all? Are you doing this for free? And I was like, well, and he said, well, if you work for free, I work for free, which was nice, right? And no, but I insisted, no, I'm going to pay. I'm going to pay like anyone else. And so we went back and forth. Finally, I gave up. I said, fine, I'm not going to pay. So
it was a chivalry argument, which is,
from the get-go.
So the chivalrous Mohammed translates for Mya the next day. They see each other again at an event months later, very briefly. It's a full year later when they actually work together again.
So, fast forward to fall of 2012, I had gotten a job with Bard College, teaching at Al-Quds University, which is in East Jerusalem. Work had picked back up. I was freelancing again for Al Jazeera English. I was working on a story that I needed to go out to the West Bank for. I needed a translator. I was studying Arabic at that time, actually, but my Arabic still wasn't quite good enough to do what I needed to do for this story. So I reached out to Mohammed and I said, are you willing to work with me for this story? And it's for Al Jazeera English and I'm getting paid and this time I can pay you. And he was like, yeah, sure, let's do it.
The story they were going to cover was a familiar one.
It was about Palestinian families that had been separated between the West Bank and Gaza. And in the most upsetting of circumstances, the story sticks with both of us to this day. There were a number of men and women both who, and there still probably are, who had been born in Gaza, right? But were living in the West Bank. And their ID cards had them, as someone who had been born in Gaza. Maybe their residency had not been updated, right? And so they were living in the West Bank and they had been stopped at checkpoints, as Palestinians are going through oftentimes internal checkpoints, not checkpoints that separate the Palestinians from Israeli areas, but checkpoints that stand inside of Palestinian areas and separate one Palestinian area from another. So oftentimes these people were going through internal checkpoints. A soldier happened to check IDs and they found IDs that said Gaza and not the West Bank. So these people, many of whom were parents, had been picked up, right? And just arbitrarily sent to Gaza, without getting to say goodbye to their families in some cases. And there was one story, a mother we interviewed by phone who was in Gaza. She had been picked up from a checkpoint and deported immediately from the West Bank to Gaza without time to say goodbye to her young children. And one of the things that she shared with me that stuck with me, that still sticks with me all these years, particularly now that I'm a mother, is every night in the West Bank, when she was putting her children to sleep, she used to do this thing that she would measure their bodies with her hands and kind of make a joke. Oh, how much have you grown today? Let's see. Mama will measure you with her hands. And that was one of the things she talked about, being in Gaza, that she was unable to do. The tears were just streaming.
The story for Al Jazeera would not be the last of that sort that Mya covered in the region. But perhaps it was one of the most difficult. It was a day of emotionally charged reporting. And while Mya was dealing with her own reactions to the heartbreaking stories, she couldn't help but notice something else.
I remember Mohammed's reactions, his empathy, his sadness, and I was quite moved.
Mohammed's reaction to the story, it makes Mya feel closer to him.
After we left that interview and we went out, we were on the edge of campus there waiting for a service back to the center of Ramallah. It's so silly. I'm still so embarrassed, but it was the golden hour, right? And the light was coming and the light hit him a certain way. And we just had this experience with this interview. And it was like the moment that Cupid shot the arrow. It knocked the breath out of me. Mohammed has these beautiful hazel eyes. They call them asal, which means honey in Arabic. So he has these really kind of gorgeous eyes, and the sun, hit the eyes, and it was just oh.
Sounds like love, right? But in this case, it's fraught. Mya explains what happens next when we come back. We're back. So Mya meets Mohammed, who translates for her and helps her on stories in the West Bank. They have a strong connection, but Mya is trying to resist it. The problem is that she doesn't see how this will work with their very different backgrounds.
Mohammed grew up in Amman in Jordan because his father had been a member of the PLO.
The PLO, also known as the Palestine Liberation Organization. When Mohammed was born in 1979, the PLO was still considered a terrorist organization by the U.S. But to others in much of the Arab world, its members were considered freedom fighters. Back to Mohammed's roots and where his family sits and lives in all of this conflict.
His father had been deported from the West Bank by the Israelis. I guess he was engaged to his mother, to Mohammed's mother, and was deported. And then Mohammed's mother followed him to Jordan.
Mohammed is the eldest of 5. When his parents found out they were having their first kid, their first thought was ID cards. If Mohammed was born in Jordan, he wouldn't get a Palestinian ID card. So, his mother went back to the West Bank alone, pregnant, returning to the village both she and her husband were from, the village of Sair.
And she gave birth there in Sair at her husband's family home. And so that way, Mohammed was able to be registered as a Palestinian resident of the West Bank and was able to get his ID, because Palestinians are always thinking about being able to return, being able to stay, being able to hold their own property, being able to pass that property on.
Bringing it back to the love story, obviously Mya and Mohammed come from very different backgrounds with a warring history.
I'd felt this attraction between us in September of 2011. To be honest, I was quite fearful of this attraction on so many different levels. I mean, one of them was like, do I really want to fall in love with someone who lives on the other side of the wall, you know, in the West Bank, who's Palestinian? And like, it wasn't about him being Palestinian. It was about all the problems that would come with trying to have that sort of relationship.
They're both reluctant to get involved, but they keep working together. And then, early in 2013, they work on another story.
After we finished our reporting, we went to have a bite to eat, and he kind of took the bull by the horns. And he said, look, you know, there are all these awkward pauses between us because we like each other. And I played coy, and I was like, I don't really know what you're talking about, you know. And he was like, you know, let's try this out, you know, let's try it out. And he said, but I'm not optimistic it's going to work. And, you know, a big part of it had to do with his family.
But they start dating. The logistics are not easy. Over time, Mohammed visits Mya in multiple places where she finds housing, all of which require him going through checkpoints. The vibe of these checkpoints is not safe for Mohammed. Anything can happen. There's this threat of being detained for no reason. It's not easy on him. But at the same time, they're falling in love. And after a while, they really want to take next steps.
So by December of 2013, we'd been dating for almost a year, which in that culture is like an eternity, you know? And so we were talking about that we wanted to get married. He was quite apprehensive about introducing me to his parents. And he kind of kept postponing and postponing. I increasingly felt like, okay, I've pretty much moved out to the West Bank for this guy. And it's not always comfortable to live out here as an American Israeli, you know, or particularly as an Israeli. It's definitely not comfortable for Palestinians. And I don't want to say that my discomfort was greater than theirs. I had a lot of privilege. I more or less moved freely. But however, yeah, it was like, well, what are we doing here? So in January, he said, okay, I'm going to take you home to meet my parents. We're going to get engaged and get married. And then finally, we had a date set that I was supposed to actually go to his parents' house for lunch after teaching one day. I was going to ride straight from Abu Dis to Ramallah and go to his parents' house, and they would host me. And the day before the big meeting, I called him and I said, well, you know, are we still on for tomorrow? And he said, yes, at first. And then he said, actually, no. And I said, oh, okay. What happened? And he said, well, my father started asking me questions.
Mohammed is the eldest son. That's an important thing to be if you're Palestinian. His father wanted to know more about this potential future daughter-in-law, but Mohammed knew he had to introduce the idea of him marrying a secular Jewish American Israeli very gently.
His strategy was like, I'm not going to tell them a lot about her because I know they're going to love her if they meet her. So his idea was like, I'm going to bring her home. They're going to fall in love with her. And then later I'm going to be like, surprise, mom and dad, she's a Jew, right? So he felt that if they fell in love with me first, they would accept the fact that I was Jewish. But he felt if it was the other way around, if the Judaism came first, they wouldn't accept me, period.
But then, in preparation for this visit, his father asks him a very specific question.
He said something like, well, what's her religion? And Muhammad said, oh, she's American. As though, Americans can't possibly have a religion. And his father was like, okay, maybe she's secular, but certainly at some point her people had some sort of religion. And Muhammad said, well, her mother is Jewish. And his father had called off the meeting. I mean, his father had said, oh, there's no way. I'm not meeting her. Absolutely not. It's just a no. And so, Muhammad told me the meeting's off. I was devastated. It's so melodramatic, but I think I literally collapsed on the floor, and dropped the phone out of my hand. And that was it. The meeting was off.
But Mya and Muhammad still want this to work, so they regroup with a new plan.
His mother was not completely opposed. So then we started thinking, okay, we're going to work on the mother and get her to buy into me, and then she's going to work on the father. That was the thinking.
I want to be very clear here. For Muhammad's parents, it wasn't just that Mya was Jewish, but that she chose, as an American Jewish person, to move to Israel and get Israeli citizenship. That's what they don't like. To them, Israel is the place that keeps them from moving freely on land that is their home. That's why it doesn't work for his mom either.
I had taken citizenship. That was a no-go for her. That was a red line.
By the way, Mya and Muhammad aren't living together at this point for many reasons.
We couldn't do that in open defiance of his father. There's also the economic issue. The economy is horrible in the West Bank. It's really, really hard for even educated Palestinians to make ends meet.
It's around this time that Muhammad visits the U.S. to see one of his brothers who lives in South Florida. What he finds during this visit is a place that seems easy. You just do whatever you want to do because it's Florida.
It was maybe in late March or early April. And he said to me, this place is amazing. He said, I drive. There are no checkpoints. You can just drive for miles and you never see a soldier. And, I run quite a bit. And in the West Bank, sometimes it's not easy to run as a, woman in Palestinian areas. And that was part of Muhammad's pitch to me. He said, you can run here in South Florida. No one's going to hassle you. So he said, what do you say? Why don't we go to the States?
Mya had just signed a 2-year contract to teach writing with Bard College. She had finally built the life she had dreamed of. But Muhammad was adamant.
He said, I'm going, with or without you, I'm going. I'm done with the West Bank, at least for now. He said, do you want to come with me? I quit it all. And, that was it. I said, okay, I'll go.
I should say, Mya doesn't quit everything to join him immediately. She drags her feet a little bit. And then that summer, in 2014, a 6-week air war breaks out in Gaza. Mya spends that summer there alone. Muhammad is already in Florida.
That was a really intense summer, obviously, very upsetting what Israel was doing to Gaza at the time. And there was heartbreak on all sides. There were Israelis who died that summer as well. And then I left in August of 2014 and moved to South Florida.
After Mya moves to the States, they get married. It's a small wedding in West Palm Beach. They sign Muslim and Jewish wedding contracts. A Jewish cantor sings the 7 blessings. Muhammad's brother is there, and he reads something from the Quran. It's romantic and lovely. But Mya knows Muhammad's parents are not on board.
I don't think that he told them right away that we got married, which was upsetting to me. I had a sense, it kind of took some needling to get it out of him that, the marriage had kind of been a secret.
In Florida, they live in a small apartment. They have a couch they got from Goodwill for $50. They build a new kind of life. Mya finds out she's pregnant in 2015. After she does, she flies back to Israel alone to update some reporting on a book she's been working on. The book is called The Unchosen, and it's about asylum seekers and migrant workers in Israel, many of whom are from Africa and Asia. This is a big trip for Mya for a lot of reasons.
I was quite big, heavily pregnant, I would say, and I was running around the country reporting. And Mohammed, while I was there, one of his brothers came in from the West Bank to meet me. This was a brother who was working on the father and trying to get the father to come around. The brother came in from the West Bank to meet me, came to Tel Aviv. He said, I'm going to help you guys fix this.
This other brother of Mohammed's, who lives in the West Bank, he respects Mya's journalism very much. He loves that she's a Jewish, American, Israeli journalist who's focused so much of her work on the experience of Palestinian people. He starts telling his dad about what she writes. He reads his dad Mya's stories, translating them for him. Mohammed's dad also likes what she writes.
2 days before I went back to Florida, Mohammed called me. He said, I have good news. I said, what? He said, my father wants to meet you. So I went out to the West Bank alone to the family home to meet his parents. And his father, sat me down on the couch. I kind of avoided him. I was quite nervous. I didn't really want to sit with him and have a big conversation. So I'd kind of followed Mohammed's mother into the kitchen, was trying to help out in the kitchen. And then everyone was like, Mya, come. You have to sit and talk with Mohammed's father. So I sat down with him on the couch and he apologized. He said, I'm sorry for what happened. And he said, now you are like a daughter to me, just like my own daughter. That was quite a moving moment.
I asked Mya to summarize what changed.
I think it was the realization that his grandchild, his granddaughter, the first grandbaby was coming. The understanding that I was not just a Jew and not just an Israeli,
They were family, with intense complications, but still family. Sadly, Mya would never get to explore this change fully, as her father-in-law died shortly after that trip. In the U.S., after years, what happens to Mya and Mohammed is kind of typical. They have 2 kids. Marriage is hard. They've overcome these massive differences, but day-to-day life and parenting, things start to fray. Mya feels kind of alone in the relationship.
Mohammed is a great man with a big heart. He's a very compassionate man, and he's calm, and he's patient, and very quiet. And I think those were the qualities that attracted me to him. But to live with someone who is very quiet and not often willing to engage a lot was very difficult for me.
Alongside the normal stressors of kids, careers, finances, there's a lack of communication that becomes too much for Mya.
There was a period it was like 10 words a day, and it felt to me like suffocation,
They divorce in December of 2022.
Nothing political at all. Just the kind of, issues that can come up, I think, in any marriage, but that were really amplified, I think, by the fact that, I had made big sacrifices to follow him to South Florida, a place where I had no one. The pressures that had come for him as being an immigrant, his mother tongue is not English, just different issues, right, that can happen.
And then, within a year, it's October 7th, 2023, the day of a Hamas-led attack in Israel that kills about 1,200 people. Hostages are taken. A new war begins. Mya was in the Seattle area researching a possible story. She starts getting texts about an attack in Israel. She checks in with Mohammed, who was with the kids in Florida. They'd been nesting, by the way. That's when the kids stay in one house, and the divorced parents go back and forth, one swooping in and the other leaving. So Mya comes home, and it's clear from that moment, Mohammed will stay put, right in the house. They'll all nest together, because even though they're exes, they need each other right now.
Usually he would leave either that day or the following morning and go back to his brothers. But in those days, we didn't even talk about it. There was no talk about him leaving. I think because we were both so upset that we found a lot of solace in each other's presence at that time.
They watched the news together, avoided the news together. They connected about a reality they understood that they felt some Americans just couldn't.
I would say immediately after October 7th, a lot of the issues that had, led me to filing for divorce kind of dropped out of my mind. We were getting along pretty well after October 7th on the whole, in part because we were upset, we were horrified, we were shocked about everything happening. In part because we were both opposed to any sort of violence, against Israelis, Palestinians, anyone, right? Just humans. So in the months following October 7th, we got on pretty well, and our own personal issues kind of seemed to just drop away. I mean, look, it made some of our, petty personal issues, seem just like that. They began to seem a bit petty, right? I don't know how to phrase it. It almost felt more important than ever for us to be under the same roof. It felt like a statement that despite what was happening there, we were still united.
Mohammed stayed with Mya in that house for an entire year. In October of 2024, he moved back to his brother's nearby in South Florida. Mya says she remembered after some time that they did get divorced for some important practical reasons. There may be a romantic future together, but it's also possible they'll stay divorced. They support each other, and they want to boost each other up as they both find happiness. She says of their relationship, there is a tremendous amount of love. When I last spoke to Mya about this just a few weeks ago, she said, the divorce is finalized, but it's not finalized emotionally. One of the things Mya says she grieves is that she always thought they'd go back to the area where they met, to live, work, and be with their kids. Now that doesn't seem possible, at least not anytime soon. I wanted to tell this story because it's many months later, and I'm reading that Gaza's health ministry reports that over 50,000 Palestinian people have been killed. And every headline seems worse. But on a very small level, it's interesting to me that when the world changed in 2023, and there was violence yet again, Mya and Mohammed, two people who love each other, came together for support. The reason they trust each other is because from the start, there's been empathy across the relationship. It was empathy through writing that helped endear Mohammed's dad to Mya. It was empathy for Maya's personal experience that allowed Mohammed to get to know and love her. Since the beginning, the two of them have been asking, how can we be good to each other? And excuse my naivete, but that kind of attitude is maybe how change happens. Maya's upcoming book is called Crossing the Line, an Israeli-Palestinian love story. It comes out in September, but you can pre-order it now. Love Letters is a production of the Boston Globe. Our producer is Christina Hanatu. Our executive producer is Kristen Nelson. This episode was also produced by Jasmine Aguilera. Uzair Ahmed does our audio mixing and mastering. Maddie Mortel is our audience engagement manager. Special thanks to Nancy Barnes and Linda Henry. Our music is from APM. Remember, Love Letters is also an advice column. Send any of your questions about dating, divorce, marriage, singlehood, friendship, whatever, to loveletters@boston.com. And if you like the show, please leave us a review.
I guess I'm a big believer in grace, in showing people grace and in having compassion, and to never fully closing the door on anyone or anything.
I'm Meredith Goldstein. Thanks for listening.